Okay, guys, I'm just waiting here for YouTube to give me the thumbs up that everything is good. I think we're probably already live, but I can't see everything yet because YouTube puts a bunch of stuff in front of me. So, okay, all right, there we go. We are live and ready for our gardening workshop. Hi, guys, my name is Rick Stone. I'm from Our Stony Acres, and I'm excited to be here today and chat with you guys a little bit about some gardening. So as we kind of start, and we're just going to take a minute here to wait for viewers to start showing up. Here we go. Lisa, how are ya? And Tasha. And guys, I am terrible at names, so I'm probably going to like totally slaughter people's names. So, okay, Charles is here too. Good. All right, guys, so we know we're live. We know we've got volume, so that's good. It doesn't tell me how many viewers we have, but I know we have at least 3. So let's go ahead and get started. While we're kind of waiting for people to jump in and be on the chat, why don't you guys tell your gardening zone is. So, for example, I live in Riverton, Utah, and my gardening zone is a 6B. So I'm just interested to know where you guys are from and what everything is like. So, okay, so we've got Kristen here, we've got Arlene here, so good stuff, good. So here's kind of the plan. So we're going to have this'll be up for replay as well, but for those of you that are watching it on a replay, we're going to take a few minutes for people to kind of collect and show up and settle in, and then we'll get started. So the plan is to go about, I'll go maybe 3 or 4 minutes here, and then we'll get started. So if you're watching the replay and you don't want to sit here and listen to me say hi to people, then go ahead and jump forward about 3 or 4 minutes, okay? All right, so let's see. Arlene, Kristen is in Dallas, zone 7. Really, I would have expected Dallas to be a little bit warmer than that. Interesting. And Pryor, Oklahoma for Arlene, zone 7. I've actually been recently in Oklahoma. Beautiful state. Georgia, zone 8B for Tasha. Texas, zone 8B for Pat. 8B in the Pacific Northwest for Mark. Toronto, zones 5, 6. Cool, you're cooler and colder than I am. Lisa is zone 5A. So cool, good stuff. All right. So guys, I guess first off, we'll kind of just keep watching the feed, and let's see, I'm just getting notices here from YouTube. And by the way, guys, this is my first live broadcast. I've done lives on Facebook before, but I've never really done a live like this on YouTube. So if I seem distracted every once in a while, I've got on my screen, I've got all this technology in front of me that I'm not used to seeing. Usually I do them on my phone, so we'll see how it goes. So I apologize if all of a sudden I go, what's this? So anyways. All right, so here's what we're going to do today. So I have a workshop for you, and this workshop is designed for new or struggling gardeners. And tomorrow, and then probably the next one will be on Monday is when that one will come through. So we'll have those coming up. All right, we've got David in Grant County, Colorado. Yes, sorry, I'm terrible at names, guys, so I apologize to begin with there on that. Okay, so let me just think here where we want it. But before we actually get started, I do want to just mention, if you look in the description down below, it gives you a little bit more information about our website, the online gardening school, and in particular the Gardening Academy, which is our monthly membership service that is open for new members right now. And so that's down below if you're interested in that. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but that's not really the whole point of this video. So, okay, so it looks like we've got 15 people here, which is good. I have no idea what to expect on a YouTube live, so we'll kind of just go with it. So now I am going to leave some time at the end for questions. So if you want to start asking some questions, the feed is moving relatively quickly here. So you may want to, like Lisa, I see you're asking a question already. Let me recommend that you hold any questions until we get to the Q&A section, just because now I may ask some questions while we're going through the presentation, but if you've got direct questions that you would like to ask me, let's hold those to the end, because this feed is just going to go flying past me, and I won't see them if we're asking them early on. So let's hold off for a minute. As what I've got is I've got about probably 25-minute presentation for you, and then we'll do that. So okay. David says, hope you're recording. Yeah, it's anybody else having audio problems? I'm seeing everything working on my end. My mic numbers are bouncing. So anybody else having any audio problems? This will definitely, YouTube does record it. So hopefully we're not having any audio issues. Anybody? I'm just going to hold off for a second, and if there's an ongoing audio issue, we'll resolve it before I get into the presentation. Okay, looks like we're okay. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I am going to move myself up here. And low. I'm going to make it just a little bit smaller here if I can. Okay, good. Sounds like we're okay. All right, so I'm going to put me up there, and we're going to kind of go through and talk about this. So first off, have you ever wondered why some people are like super successful at gardening and then other people just, you know, struggle and have a hard time, or why one garden in a neighborhood flourishes and just does really well, and then, you know, 3 streets or 3 houses down, you know, that garden, somebody else's garden, just really struggles? That's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about some of the very basic foundations that will help you to get your garden. We're going to cover in this workshop today is we're going to talk about the 3 different types of gardens that you can have, which are in-ground gardens, raised bed gardens, and container gardens. We're going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of each of those and how maybe choosing one over the other might help you. And then after that, we're going to talk about choosing or correcting the spot where your garden is. So either choosing a good spot for it, or if you already have a spot, some things that we can do to correct it. And sometimes that may, and you'll see, I'm going to show you a picture of my old garden. It ended up that we just needed to move, which was unfortunate, but we'll explain why. So that's kind of where we're going, and the point is. So let me see here. There we go. It looks like I need to make myself just a little bit smaller here. Okay. All right, so why should we be gardening? First off, I just wanted to talk a little bit about why I think it's important that we all are gardening. And I'm not doing, in any way am I doing this video to like capitalize on what's happening in the world, but I definitely am glad that I have a garden right now and that I already have things growing in my garden, because there's so much craziness going on. Now, we were at the grocery store this morning, and there was plenty of food. We went there for bananas and milk, and we got it, and we were okay. But boy, it sure did freak me out when we went in the grocery store here a week and a half ago, and there wasn't anything there, even in the produce section. So that's part of why I think it's so important for us to grow a garden, is that kind of self-reliance aspect of it. Yeah. Sam says for our mental health, there's a lot of different aspects to that. Relieve stress, being just out in nature and everything like that. So let me talk about, number one, this picture behind here is the main reason why I grow a garden, and that's fresh produce. Look at those. You know, what do we got there? We've got some cucumbers, we've got zucchini, we've got a couple of different types of tomatoes. In that, and then a patapan squash up here, this white one up here at the top. I don't know if you guys can see my pointer, probably not, but the fresh produce is just so awesome. And the nice thing about garden produce is the time that produce is the most nutritious, for the most part. There's some that don't do this, but a lot of fruits and vegetables are most nutritious when you just pick fresh, picked out of the garden. That's when it's most nutritious. And so instead of it sitting in a car, you know, in a truck and then sitting at a grocery store, if you're fresh picking it from the garden, you're getting the most nutrients that you possibly can. And then if we're worried about the environment at all, then think about all the miles that your produce at the grocery store travels, and it travels like 50 feet. we're if that. So this is my garden, and let me move my picture here really quick. Here's our house, and you can see our produce travels a whopping 25 feet in order to get to where it belongs. So that is why I think that we should have a garden. The other reasons, a greater variety. Have you guys ever, think about the tomatoes that you can buy at a grocery store. So there's going to be one big tomato, kind of a slicing tomato. There may be like a Roma tomato at a grocery store. Then you're going to have a cherry tomato and maybe a grape. And that is probably the whole variety that that you're going to get at a grocery store. Now open up a seed catalog and look at all the different varieties of tomatoes that are out there. Different colors, textures, and then besides that, they just taste so dang good when they're fresh out of the garden because they're vine ripened. And so there's lots and lots of reasons that you should be gardening, and I just think that that's an important thing to do. Okay, so who am I? Again, my name is Rick Stone, and I have been gardening for 22, 23 years, depending on how technical you want to get, maybe even 25. But our first 2 or 3 gardens were like 1 tomato and some strawberry plants in a flower bed. But we've had a big full-size garden now for about 23 years. And on top of that, I graduated from the Master Gardener program, which if you have a chance to do that, that is an awesome program that you will really love being a part of. So I graduated from the Master Gardener program in 2012, and I have been teaching people online since 2014, so 5 going on 6 years now. And I have about 4,000 students in my various different courses and classes. So anyways, I've been doing this quite a while, and I really love teaching people how to garden. And that is, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to read. I'm going to have to learn how to do this whole live feed thing because I'm seeing things jumping back and forth as well. So it looks like we're okay. All right. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's actually hit the point of our lesson today. And is what I want to do is I want to talk to you about gardens and the different types of gardens that you can actually grow in your backyard. Okay, so there are really 3 options for most people. There's a fourth, and that the fourth would be a hydroponic garden. And I am not an expert on hydroponic gardens at all. And so I'm not even going to try and, I try to not talk about things that I'm not an expert in. So we're not going to cover hydroponics. But there are 3 really kind of traditional ways that you can grow a garden. In-ground gardens, raised bed gardens, or container gardens. And so I want to talk for a few minutes about each one of these types of gardens. And then some of the advantages and disadvantages of each so that we can kind of go through and help you guys to make a decision. Now, some of you may already have an in-ground garden and you're thinking about switching to raised beds, and we'll talk about some reasons there. Some of you may have some containers that you're growing in right now and are wanting to expand, so we'll kind of talk about those type of things. So as you go along, I'll try and watch, and if you have a question about specifically what we're talking about, I'll see what I can do to answer it, okay? All right, so the first type of garden that I would like to talk to you guys about is an in-ground garden. And let's see, what do we got here? So this is a picture of my in-ground garden, and I actually garden all 3 ways. The main part of our garden, let me go back to this picture right here. So this is a little bit broader view of our garden. The main part of our garden is about 1,200 square feet. The beds, we have 6 beds. They're 25 feet long, most of them. There's a couple that are just a little bit shorter. And that is where we grow the bulk of our produce. And most of that is in ground. So as you can see here, an in-ground garden, the beds are actually in the ground. They're not raised beds. They're dealing with the native soil usually for the most part. And in-ground gardens can really have some advantages. One of the main advantages and one of the main reasons why you might want to choose an in-ground garden is because it's the cheapest and easiest way to get started. So basically all you got to do is dig up some soil. That is as easy as it gets, really. So this, if you look at my garden, you can see it's right next to some lawn area there. All of our garden used to be, when we moved into this place, it was all lawn, and we tore out that big section of lawn and tilled it up, and away we went. Okay, and so that's one of the main advantages of an in-ground garden. It's very, very easy to set up. The other thing is, depending on your soil, and some of you will have some real difficult soil conditions. So you may have heavy, heavy, heavy clay, or you may have really super sandy soil. And in those cases, an in-ground garden may not be the best choice for you. But for the bulk of us, planting a garden in the native soil in your area, and then augmenting and improving that existing soil is usually one of the best ways to grow a garden. Just getting that natural soil, you have more exposure to the microbiome, that's in the soil, worms and grubs and insects and everything that are in that soil are, you have more access to that. And so it usually just makes, if you care for your soil, it usually makes for a really good environment to grow fruits and vegetables. Okay, so you'll see, because I'm going to show you all of my garden, and you'll see that the bulk of our garden is in ground, just because it's so much easier to deal with, and it's kind of not as confined as a raised bed garden or a container garden. So you have more potential, more space, more flexibility with trellising and all that kind of stuff. Now, there are some downfalls of in-ground gardening as well. Number one is, depending on how you're watering, and you can see here, in this picture, I must have had a leak. I use a PVC drip irrigation system, and I must have had a leak because you can see there's a big puddle there. And that can often be the case, especially if you water with sprinklers. Then you may end up having all kinds of mud issues with your garden. So if your pathways are dirt and you water with a sprinkler, there may be 2 or 3 days that you can't get into your garden to do much of anything because of that. So that's one disadvantage of an in-ground garden. Now, you can take care of that by adding rock pathways or wood chip pathways or something like that can help to limit that, but that is definitely one issue. The other issue that I have found is I do have bigger weed issues with my in-ground garden than I do with my raised bed gardens, and I think that's kind of just the nature of the beast. There's going to be more weed seed there as the years have gone on, and this garden that you're looking at now is 8 years old. We've been in this place for 8 years. And now our weed issues are starting to kind of resolve themselves a little bit because we've been working hard on keeping the weeds down. But definitely in-ground gardens will usually have a little bit more weed maintenance to do. The other thing is sometimes they're a little bit more difficult to work, especially if you're a little bit older. Raised bed gardens have some advantages in the fact that they're a little bit easier to get to and deal with that way. So that is in-ground gardens, and I love in-ground gardens. Now, I use kind of a modified bed method, so you can see that I have these big, broad 4-foot beds, and they're always in the same spot every year. So I don't till my entire garden. In fact, I don't till anymore at all. I kind of use a no-dig method where we supplement with compost and just turn into the top 2 or 3 inches of the soil. But I've established these beds, and then I'm able to just take care of them. Another advantage of in-ground gardens is, and again, this varies a little bit based on what your native soil is like, but for us, the soil overall is a little less needy, if that makes sense. So I don't have to worry if I happen to not get some compost in one time or something like that. The soil kind of handles that a little bit better, whereas in my raised beds, where that's kind of more confined soil and a little bit more of a soilless mix, it's way needier, and I have to constantly be amending and worrying about that. Now, not that you shouldn't be constantly amending your in-ground gardens. I've just found that they're slightly less needy, if that makes sense, in dealing with that. Let's look at some comments here before we move on. So Charles is saying He has clay soil converted from a lawn using no-dig method. That's kind of, similar to what we did, although we converted from a lawn and we did initially till this entire area once. So we did run a tiller over it once, then we established the beds, measured everything out and established those beds, and we haven't tilled since. So, okay. All right, so let's move on to our next option, which is raised bed. Have been married, and the first place that we lived, we just had an in-ground garden. Second place we lived, we had an in-ground garden that I'll show you here in a little while, and then we did have some raised beds as well, and then we've done the same thing here. So we have an in-ground garden, and then in a space, an area where we couldn't actually put an in-ground garden, we put some raised beds. Okay, so let's talk about raised beds and some of the advantages and disadvantages of raised beds. So first off, raised beds are easier to work with. So let's get a picture up. So this is some of my raised beds. This was actually the year that I built them. You can see the wood is still new there, and we built ours 8 feet long by 3 feet wide. And the reason why we chose 3 feet is we're starting to get a little older. We're not old yet, in my opinion, but we're starting to get a bit older. And it's easier, a 3-foot bed is a little bit easier to reach in and out of than a 4-foot bed. So we chose a 3-foot bed. Ours are 18 inches tall. You can definitely, with raised beds, can go a lot more, a lot higher and taller if you want. I've seen people that have actually put raised beds on stilts so that they could work with them in wheelchairs and stuff like that. There's in my in-laws neighborhood, there's a couple that, so that's one of the great flexibility things that you can deal with when we are talking about raised bed gardens. Also, like I said before, there's less weeding. Almost universally, I have found that over the years. So I've had 8 raised beds total, 4 at our last place. We have 4 at this place now, and overall, weeding is less intense in these raised beds. Number one, the soil is usually kind of a little lighter and easier to pull weeds out of, and then there just isn't as much direct weed access, in my opinion, when we have a raised bed. Okay, they look nicer. For sure. We actually, you can't see this from this picture, but if a little nicer. They're a little fancier so that they look good. And I've seen some just gorgeous raised bed gardens. And so if you're concerned, and in fact, I work, my day job is I work with, I'm not a real estate agent, but I work with a lot of real estate agents in the accounting function. And in talking with them, if you're worried about property value and a garden, then putting in raised beds is the thing to do, because they look nicer, they're easier to maintain, it kind of gives you this neat look to your garden, and so that's definitely a good option to look at there. Okay, a couple of disadvantages of the raised bed method would be, number one, they are limited in size, so sometimes you may be a little bit limited in the crops that you can plant. Things that you can do, but not terribly. The one disadvantage that I see to it is start small, which we're going to talk about in tomorrow's workshop. But raised beds are a great way to start small. And then the other real disadvantage that I see to raised bed gardens is that they usually require more water. So in our area, we're semi-arid desert. And my flatbed garden has to be watered in the summertime. So, June, July, August, and the first part of September, I'm watering my flatbed garden about every 4 days. Whereas my raised bed gardens, in order to keep them alive, I'm having to water them about every 2 days. And the reason why is because there's more exposure to the outside air, so there's more evaporation. The water will go through the soil, and there's no subsoil to hold it, if that makes sense. And so you're definitely going to be watering more often. I know people here that live in our area that have to water their raised bed gardens every day. And that's part of the reason why I've chosen, the mix that I've chosen to put in my beds is 50% topsoil and 50% organic compost. And then every year I add more and more compost to it. and that seems the mix of topsoil and compost seems to retain water a little bit better than some of the more like soilless mixes. Some people will, in a raised bed, they'll put a third peat moss, a third compost, and a third perlite or vermiculite, and those soilless mixes like that seem to require a lot more water. So that's, I think that's kind of mainly the main disadvantage that I see to a raised bed garden. But I do really dig our raised bed gardens. Let me show you. This is a new one that we actually just built last year. It's not as visible to the street, and so we didn't make it quite as fancy as you can see. We just slapped it together, so it's just some boards. Now, materials that you should be making your raised bed gardens out of. Yeah, good question, Charles. I was just actually going to ask that. So because we live in a very dry state that doesn't get a lot of rain, I mean, we hardly get any rain in the wintertime or in the summertime at all. And, our total rainfall for the year is like 10 or 12 inches, where some states have that much in a month. And so we're able to get away with wood. And in fact, and they're fine. These beds, let me see if I've got another. Yeah, so these beds have actually been around now for 4 years and are still in great shape and look really, really good. You can treat them. I prefer to treat them, if I'm going to treat them, with something like linseed oil. That's not toxic, and it's not going to seep into your beds and your soil and stuff. But you can definitely treat them. But if you live in wetter areas of the world where you get a lot more rain, so I'm thinking Pacific Northwest, all of the south of the United States, England, all along the Mediterranean, where you have a lot more rainfall, you're going to want to use either some more resilient woods, so something like cedar or redwood, something like that, or you may want to choose a masonry type product, so brick, rock. I've seen some just really beautiful applications of combination of wood with that corrugated metal, and they look really, really nice, really sharp. In fact, I've got some neighbors. Maybe I'll have to go take a picture sometime so that I can show you guys, but they look really, 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 really good. So if you live in a high rainfall area where there's lots of moisture, you're definitely going to have to deal differently with your raised beds, and you may be making them out of stone, brick, concrete blocks, poured concrete. You could then, like I say, some type of metal. I've seen beds made out of stainless steel. In fact, we have our local conservation gardens, and it's run by one of our water districts, and they actually made the beds out of stainless steel. Very expensive. Very expensive for sure, but they look very cool, and they're going to last forever. So yeah, definitely you do have to think about where you live, what you're going to be making it out of. Okay, all right, that is raised beds. Okay, so next we're going to talk about containers. Now, containers are not my favorite, and part of the reason why containers are not my favorite is because it's very hard in a very arid place like ours to keep the dang things wet. Okay, so we do grow a little bit in containers. This is actually, unfortunately I didn't have a lot of pictures of my containers that were vegetables. This is some of the ones that we plant some herbs in, and this was early in the spring. You can see they're just getting started, but we plant several different types of herbs. Herbs are really good, do really well in containers, and then a lot of leafy greens will do really good in containers. The biggest struggle you're going to have with container gardening is the bigger plants. So tomatoes or squashes or potatoes, anything like that, you're going to struggle a little bit. It's not impossible to grow those things in containers, but it is more difficult. Okay. Now, containers are great for those of you that have very small yards or no yard at all. I know people who grow a very productive garden on the balcony of their apartment. If you've got the right sun, then it definitely can happen. So there are lots of applications for containers. The disadvantages of containers are that, number one, you're constantly going to be watering them. So you have to be prepared to possibly, depending on the time of year, possibly watering those plants twice a day. In our area, if I don't water twice a day with my containers, then they're toast. like quickly. So I have to water in the morning and I water in the evening, and so that's one of the main disadvantages. And then of course you have limits on the size of your garden and the varieties as well. The one nice thing is that there are enough people growing in containers now that plant breeders have caught on to that, and so we have some really nice container varieties of a lot of the traditional fruits and vegetables. So you can get a container cucumber, you can get a container size squash plant, zucchini, crookneck squash, tomatoes. A lot of plant breeders have bred these smaller varieties that will still do well in a big container, in a big pot. A few things to remember with containers is you are going to have to care for the soil a lot. You will probably have to fertilize. So there's probably no getting away from fertilizing in containers. You'll have to do some type of fertilizer, whether it's an organic or a conventional fertilizer. You will definitely have to do that. Whereas if you're taking care of your soil in a raised bed garden or a flat, an in-ground garden, then you probably don't need to do much in the way of fertilizing. Again, if you're caring for your soil and adding lots of compost. But in containers, that little bit of soil is just going to get the nutrients just sucked out of it, so you're going to have to be constantly amending. Now, you don't have to replace the soil every year, so don't feel like that you have to do that. But you do need to be amending that soil, so you need to be adding compost every year to your containers, and if you have to take some soil out and put it in another container in order to add compost, then do it. But that's one of the main disadvantages, and then just kind of the overall space is kind of the limit to container gardenings. But it's something that you should definitely include in your garden, and we, like I say, we have all three of these in our garden, and there's applications to each of them. So there you go. That is the first part that I wanted to talk about today, is just the different types of gardens. So let's take a look here and see if we have any other questions. Okay, so RSJ Texas, hey, how are you? We saw you yesterday when I was doing the test drives, so thanks for coming back. Okay, all right, so if you guys have got any questions about this part, I do want to talk a little bit more about where to put your garden, and so we'll talk about that too. But if you've got some questions you want to throw at me right now about what we've talked about so far, yeah, so Charles is saying he's got a fig tree in a container and it gets blown over all the time. That's another disadvantage, especially with big, taller plants. It's difficult to grow those taller plants in containers because they get top heavy and blow over. But I've seen some people do some really fun things, some really fun things with containers and trees. I've seen people do the Asaplier, in a container against a house, and just lots of fun stuff. So don't rule out containers. The bigger the better, in my opinion. So these containers that you see in this picture are all for herbs basically, but if I were to grow like tomatoes or potatoes or a tree or something like that, I would go much bigger. Go big and give those plenty of space for those roots and things like that. Okay, all right, doesn't look like we have any other questions on this section, so let's move on. Wait a minute, here we go. Here's a question. This is from Optimal Business Services. How do you protect your garden from animals? Okay. Oh, and I know, and see, I'm going to blow your name again. It's okay, not even going to try. I know the gal at Optimal Business Solutions. She's part of one of my courses, but I can't remember how she told me to say her name, so I apologize. Okay, so how do you protect your garden from animals? Okay, great question, good question. Before we move on, let's cover that one. So you're going to have several different solutions, and it depends on the animal. First off, if it's bird problems, or even to some extent squirrels, chickmunks, things like that, you can protect your garden with netting. So bird netting is a great solution for protecting. Yeah, there we go. It's Ilua. See, I'm not even going to pronounce it when you spell it out. Ilua. So Ilua, that's one thing, is netting. So keeping birds out, netting is super effective for that. And it's also going to help with squirrels. Squirrels are a little more determined sometimes, and so the netting may not be perfect. Other solutions, so if we're talking like deer, the only way to keep deer out of a garden is a big fence, okay? And it needs to be either tall or wide, or both preferably. So a fence to keep deer out needs to be bare minimum 6 feet high, maybe even taller than that. If you can't get it 6 feet high, then you're going to have to put something on top to make it wide as well. Deer can jump high and they can jump wide, but they can't jump both at the same time. So you have to build a fence that's tall and wider at the top so that they will be intimidated and won't jump over it. If we're talking things like burrowing animals like gophers or moles, one way to keep them out of your garden is to put metal like chicken wire or fencing down before you put your raised bed gardens in. That will help keep them out. And then just other fencing options are going to help you with raccoons. Raccoons are pretty tough to deal with one way or the other, but rabbits, things like that, you're gonna put a fence that's small and will keep them out. And then put out deterrents. You can get sprinklers that come on automatically when animals make movement, and that should scare them off. For birds, you put out whirligigs and things that spin and make noise. A dog is always a good solution to keep most animals out of your garden, but then they may get in your garden too. So yeah, it's tough to deal with wildlife for sure. We used to have a deer problem, but it's kind of gone away as our city has continued to grow. What we used to live in what was the outer edges of the suburbs, kind of almost to the country, and now over the last 15 years that has changed, and it's actually driven the deer out, which is good and bad at the same time. Let's look here. Raccoons and possums are definitely hard to deal with. Yeah, they have thumbs. Wicked Willow says they have thumbs and they're hard to deal with. Raccoons, possums, we don't have possums in our area, and so I have never had to deal with possums. I lived in Northern California for a little while, and we had possums there, but I wasn't gardening at the time. I was just in college. And so, yeah, raccoons, that's when my solution is probably a dog, that will scare them off and keep them away. It's pretty hard to keep raccoons out of a garden if they're determined to get into them. So, and I would assume the same with possums. Rabbits, Charles, I'm sure that you're putting up fencing. The one nice thing about rabbits is they don't jump super high, so even just a 2-foot fence will keep rabbits out of your garden. They always say that, but I've always gone, well, nobody builds a 2-foot fence, But if you build like a 3-foot fence and it's small enough that the rabbits can't fit through, then that should keep them out. Another thing that you could do as well is put some wire fencing underneath in the ground, because they're going to try and burrow, and if you put it out about 18 inches, that should help. Okay. Yeah. Pat says dogs handle the possum problem. So yeah, if you've got a raccoon or a possum problem, dogs are probably your solution. Okay. All right. So let's move on here, and then we'll leave a little time again at the end if you guys want to start posting some other questions as well. Okay. Let me see if I answered. I think we got everything. Lisa says she grows mint in containers and it goes like crazy. Herbs do really well in containers, that's for sure. Okay, so let's talk about where you want to put your garden, where you want to place your garden. There's 3 important things, in my opinion, that you need to do to make sure that you're successful with a garden. And the first one is sunshine. Now, if you're a new gardener and you're watching this video, that's good. You can go and choose locations that have these 3 qualifications. If you already have an existing garden and you're struggling, then you may want to look at some of these and see what you can do to remedy them, possibly moving location or whatever. So let's talk first about sunshine. So back to my picture of my raised beds, you can see they have a ton of sun. These beds during the summertime, they get about 10 hours of sun a day. That fence that you see on the it's on my right hand side, so I'm not sure if it's on your right hand side as well, but that water, or that fence is on the west side, and so it does get some late afternoon sun, which actually is, I'm sorry, it gets late afternoon shade, and that's actually an advantage in this situation because it kind of, that really intense hot afternoon sun kind of shades here. But these beds get a solid 8 to 10 hours of sunlight a day, which is what you're looking for. You're looking for an area that gets that much sun. Okay, so this is a picture of my old garden, and I can say that I did not make this mistake. Okay, you can see it's in the shade. Okay, and if you were to look over here where this rock path is on the what to me is the right hand side, and I think it's probably the right hand side for you guys too. Just beyond that, there's a fence, and then my neighbors put big pine trees that they planted right there, and so the people who originally built this home put this garden space right here, and this was on the south side of the yard, which is, was a good place for it. But then the neighbor put in a fence and these giant trees, and it turned this garden into a very unproductive garden. And you can see you want to avoid shade as much as possible. And again, experts will say 6 to 8 hours of sunlight a day, and I say more if possible. Okay, you need to choose a location that gets as much sun as possible during the daytime. So try to avoid trees and fences and buildings all you can, because any shade that your garden gets is going to limit what you can grow, how well things will grow. And so sunshine is the most important thing, in my opinion. Getting a sunny spot. So how do you fix a spot that's not sunny? You have to get rid of the obstacles that are causing the shade. So sometimes that's possible, sometimes it isn't. You can cut trees down and do things like that, but basically, you need to you need to get sun into that garden the best you can. And again, look for spots in your yard that get bare minimum 8 hours of sunlight a day, preferably more. And this is in the summertime. Obviously, in the wintertime, you're not going to get as much, but that can definitely you definitely have to look in the summertime, getting as much sun as possible. Okay. All right. We've got a few questions here. Let's take a look. Wicked Willows was going to say, yeah, grow good greens and stuff, and that's all we could grow back there. And in fact, we even now, if you look at our garden right now, the bed that's on the furthest here that has the broccoli in it. Sorry, I'm pointing to the screen. That's silly. You guys can't see that. The bed that's got the broccoli right there, in the bottom right-hand corner. That bed actually now does not get as much sun as it used to because we had a commercial development come in behind us in what used to be a horse pasture, and now it's a grocery store, and they put up a big wall, and so that wall actually shades that one bed that you're looking at there, and so we're pretty limited on what we can grow there because the shade-free time for that bed is pretty short during the summer. We only, from about June until the end of August, there's not shade on that bed, so we're pretty limited on what we can grow there. So you need to look for sunny spots. Yeah, so Garrow Lady is saying we have to cut down the pine tree to give more gardening spot more sun. Yeah, you just have to make the hard things. You got to make those hard decisions a lot of time. I've got some friends who I have helped over the years with their garden, and they keep complaining it just doesn't grow. They have this giant apricot tree in the middle of their garden, and I keep telling them the only way your garden is going to be successful is if you get rid of that tree. And I know you love it, but if you want that garden to grow, you got to get rid of that shade. So sunshine is the most important thing. Let me just take a drink really quick here, guys. Sorry, getting a little scratchy. Okay, next is soil. All right, so the type of soil that you have in your garden is super important, and knowing what you have is also very important. So the first thing that I would recommend that you do, if you haven't done this, whether you're a new gardener or a more experienced gardener, the first thing that I would recommend that you do is get a soil test done. Okay, so you can take a sample of soil and then look online. Usually, your states will have an agricultural college. That's changing a little bit because we're becoming less and less agricultural. If you live in the Midwest or the West, you're going to have agricultural college, somewhere. And usually those colleges will do soil tests. If you can't find one at your state, so like ours is Utah State University, Kansas, I know it's Kansas State University. Look for your agricultural college and see if they do soil testing. Usually is what you can do is take a soil test, mail it into them, they'll run the test, and they'll come back and tell you what you have. Is it clay, is it loam, is it sand? Then they'll also tell you, what your pH is. They'll tell you, what your nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium balances are. They'll tell you, some of the trace minerals, not all, but they'll tell you a lot of those as well. So make sure that you get a soil test done. That's the first thing that I think you should do, so that you understand what you're getting. Okay? Then the next thing that you should do is what this picture is showing, and that is compost. Okay? I love compost, and you should be putting compost in your garden every year. I prefer to put compost in my garden every fall. So I try to add at least 2 or 3 inches of compost and then mix it into the top 3 or so inches of soil every fall. The reason why I choose to do it in the fall is then that gives it all winter to kind of break down and incorporate better into the soil. Compost is just so good for your soil. And, I'm not saying that you have to make your own compost. You can bring it in, you can import it in. Of course, I'd love to hear about people that are making their own compost and doing their own compost, whether it's worm composting or traditional composting. But you definitely should be putting compost. And then whenever you can, you should be putting other organic material into your garden. So for example, in the fall, I rake up all my leaves and mow my lawn, and I dig some trenches in my garden and I bury all of that stuff. That's called trench composting. And then when I have scraps, like in September and August when we have so much coming in produce-wise, and we have peels and rinds and everything like that, I put all of that buried in the garden, because all of that, adding all of that organic material to your soil is just going to help make it better. So if you have sandy soil, adding compost will add nutrients to the soil, make it retain water better. If you have heavy clay soil, then adding compost to the soil will break it down, break up the clay, help to free up some of the nutrients that are there in the soil. If you have a good neutral loam soil, adding compost is going to keep it that way. Okay, so compost. Make sure you put it in. Okay. All right, let's look. I saw some questions popping up here. Ron's saying, Wicked Willow's saying, in Vermont, VSU does soil tests for both Vermont and VA is Virginia, isn't it? So yeah. And then we've got some other. Let's see, what do we have? Ron's saying we have raised beds that are 35 inches high due to age and hip knee replacements. What should we use to amend the soil? This is the 3rd year. Compost. And if it's been 3 years and it's raised bed, and it's kind of up to you. Raised bed gardens, you're usually controlling the soil a little bit more, but you could even get a soil test done on your raised bed gardens if you want as well. And see what, if anything, they're lacking, and then add that in. But with raised beds, compost. Add compost. Add organic material. If it's 35 inches high, you should be able to dig a hole and throw, your banana peels and your watermelon rinds and all of the leftover greens and things that you're not using. Dig a hole in a spot that's not being used and bury them. And that will decompose and add nutrients to the soil. So that's what you should be doing, is just adding compost. Virginia. I'm sorry. I see that. Wicked Willow says Virginia Tech. VT is Virginia Tech. Okay. So VSU and Virginia Tech do testing back there. Okay. Cool. All right. So that is soil. Now, let me just see if I missed anything on my list. Oh, okay. Let's go back, just so that I remember. So one thing. If you have terrible soil issues, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, so if you've got problems with sandy soil or really, really heavy clay soil, one solution to that soil problem might be raised beds. So if your soil is just awful, then you might want to just start fresh with a raised bed. And don't use your native soil to fill the bed, bring in soil. So bring in some topsoil and bring in some compost and do it that way. So one of the ways to deal with a really awful soil is by using raised beds. Okay? All right. Access to water. Oh, okay, Amy, I see that. I'll try and remember that as we go through today. Okay, the last one and last important thing is access to water. And guys, we're kind of wrapping up here. This is the last thing I want to talk about. So if you have other questions, feel free to throw those at me as well, and then we'll kind of wrap up and move on, because I've been going for 53 minutes already, and I don't want to keep you much longer. Okay, so the last thing is access to water. So you need to have water close to your garden. And I did see a question earlier asking, who do we call to put a spigot in? You're probably going to need to call, if you're not qualified to do it yourself, you're probably going to need to call a plumber to do that. And so putting water close to your garden is really important. I've seen people make this mistake all the time. So they've got maybe like a half an acre, and they've got this nice sunny spot at the back of their yard, and they decide to put their garden back there. But there's no hose spigot back there. And so they end up running a hose back and forth across the lawn to the garden all the time. And the problem with that is it sets you up for being lazy and not watering. Okay? And watering, this is kind of my own personal opinion, but 80% of problems with a garden are usually water related. Okay? Either you're overwatering, you're underwatering, you're grouping plants wrong, and so you're watering one too much and one not enough, and things like that. So water to me is super important. And so you need to have water close to your garden so that it's not hard and you never have an excuse. Because I know, like my raised bed gardens for a long time, I had to drag a hose over to them. And I would, it would be the end of the day and I'm tired, and I'd go, oh, you know what? I'll do it tomorrow. Because I don't want to drag the hose over there and deal with it and get it all set up, so I'll do it tomorrow. Okay? And then the next day, it'd go all day until night, and then it was too long, And so you need to have water close, and if you're at all tempted to not water your garden, then you need to set up some type of automatic system. So some type of automated system that makes that easy for you. Okay? And I prefer drip systems. You can see this is my drip irrigation system, and we use a PVC drip irrigation system, but they also have several other different tube types that you can use as well. And so access to water is super important. Okay, questions. So let's give you just a minute here, and we'll see if we have any questions come up. So let's look. I have some 9-year-old hay in our barn that is moldy. Can I use as compost? Okay, so hay wouldn't be considered compost. You could use it as mulch. Or you could use it if you're going to start a compost pile. You could use the hay as a brown in your compost pile. So you need greens and browns, and we're not going to go into composting too much here, but you could definitely use that hay for your compost, or you could use it as a mulch. I'm a little bit worried about the mold, but you probably would be okay with hay. I grew up on a farm and we raised horses, and so I know what moldy hay is like, and it's not the kind of mold that I'm overly worried about causing problems with your plants. So you could definitely use it as a mulch, but not as a compost. So eventually it will break down and kind of compost its way into the garden, but you could definitely use it as a mulch to keep weeds down and stuff like that. Okay. How to improve, Charles, how to improve clay soil. Compost, 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 and other organic matter. My father-in-law, so we have heavy, here in Utah, we have pretty heavy clay soil, but it varies from place to place. Ours is not terribly bad here, but my father-in-law, his garden was out of control heavy clay. Like every year it was like a brick by the time the winter was over with. And the way he was able to have a very productive, which he was a rockin' gardener. He passed away a couple of years ago, but he was an awesome gardener. And the way he was able to keep his garden productive was by adding organic material to it constantly. So he top dressed with compost, and then every fall he would dig a giant pit in his garden. And his garden wasn't huge, it was maybe 20 by 20. But he would dig a giant pit in a different spot every year in his garden, and he would put all of his leaves and all of his grass clippings in that pit and then cover it up. And that would decompose and mulch, and compost in the ground over the winter time. And that's how he dealt with his heavy clay. So the only way to deal with heavy clay is either go with raised beds or constantly add compost and other organic material to your garden all the time. Compost, compost, compost. Every time you plant, put in some compost. In the fall, put in compost. Do your very best there. Okay. All right. Yeah. Lisa's saying sandy soil with topsoil is great for growing garlic. Mold will kill your plants. Lisa, a lot of people use hay as a mulch, and hay just molds, and it's not quite the same mold. I don't know that much about mold, but I've never seen the mold in hay kill plants. It's a little bit different than some of the other fungi that kill them. Okay, so let's see. What about vermicomposting? Very good option. I'm not super familiar with it, so I'm not going to try and tell you a lot of things. I just do traditional composting where we, greens and browns. But vermicomposting is another great option. All of the worm composting as well are all really great options if that's something that you want to get into. People just really, some people just love the vermicomposting, and it's super good. Any kind of compost is really, really good for your garden. Okay, Amy says they tapped into our house with 3/4 inch Plex and then buried it in the ground and set it up next to the garden. And that's exactly what you're going to have to do. So you're going to have to tap into the water at your house and then drag it out, and then take it out to the garden itself. Okay, Dean is asking how we use PVC for watering things that are usually planted in blocks. Lettuce, carrots, spinach, not planted in rows. Good question. So let me go back. Let me see. I don't know that I have a picture. No, you know what? I'm not gonna. Yeah, that one's hard. See, that's actually, if you look at it, that's a block. That's actually raspberries that we're looking at there. The way you use the PVC system for blocks is a few more pipes. Those pipes, the water from the PVC will usually soak out about 6 inches. So you can put pipes about 12 inches apart, and water and a good soaking will just spread out. So for example, my raised beds usually have 2 or 3 pipes in each, and they're 3 foot across, and that just soaks in, so if the pipes are about a foot apart, they'll soak in between and pretty much take care of it. Okay. Okay, so Lux Luxury is saying, what's the best advice for putting in a brand new garden in Zone 6B? Now is the time. You're right. I actually have already started planting in my Zone 6B garden with protection. So I've got fabric row covers out, but it's definitely time. And best advice is the things that we talked about earlier. Make sure that you get it in a sunny spot, that you have access to your water, and that you choose a good soil. So if you're putting in raised beds, choose, there's a couple of different options you can go with. I like the topsoil compost mix, but there's other people that do the peat moss compost and perlite mix. but just good soil, and then take care of your soil. And soil is so important. You just have to care for your soil. Okay. All right. Could I do a live broadcast on berries and other fruits? We could talk about that. It's not definitely could be something that I could do, Pat, in the future. Right now, I've got 3 more planned, guys, by the way, for you. So we're going to do another one tomorrow. It'll be a much shorter one about some keys to really doing a good garden early on and hitting things quickly. And then, we can definitely do something another time. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, the holes that I drill are about 1/16, Amy, that I drill into my PVC. Yeah, so Lux, I've got lots of good stuff for you, so we'll talk about that here in just a minute. That might help you, so hang around. And then, Aluja, do I put anything in the bottom of my raised beds or just soil? I put fabric, that heavy weed fabric underneath, but that's because my raised beds are sitting on gravel, and I didn't want the gravel migrating up into the beds. You don't have to put anything underneath, but it depends on your native soil. So if you're trying to replace the native soil because your native soil is so heavy clay or so sandy, then I would put something down to keep your raised bed soil from spreading into the native soil. But if your native soil is fine and you're just wanting raised beds because they look nice or they're easier to work with, then I wouldn't worry about it. It's okay if the natural soil gets mixed in. Okay, so hopefully that helps. Okay, all right. So looks like that's the end of our questions. So tomorrow I'm going to do another one of these. I'll get it on the schedule. We'll probably do it about 10:30 again, and it won't be as long this time. I've just got some shorter things to talk about. We're going to talk about keys to early success, and then on Monday we'll do another one at about the same time where we talk about seeds that are the easiest for new gardeners to grow. So seeds that would be really good for those of you that are just starting out to grow. So that's coming up. Okay, all right, really quick, guys, I want to just take a second, and you guys have asked some really good questions, and so I wanted to talk to you just about the Gardening Academy as well. So the Gardening Academy is our monthly membership option, which we have on the online gardening school, and that is currently open for new students, so we're accepting new students. So what is the Gardening Academy? The Gardening Academy is a program that I've designed to help you become a better gardener, and the way we do that is by focusing on a different gardening topic every month. So part of your membership with the Gardening Academy is every month we choose a topic. So for example, for the month of March, our topic is growing tomatoes. And so we talk about growing tomatoes throughout the month. And then every week we have something new that comes out that's related to that topic. So the first week of every month we have a planting guide, and I go through all the different zones and we talk about what you should be planting in those zones that month. And then the following week we do a mini course on whatever the topic is. So like we did a tomato mini course this month, teaching you to grow tomatoes. And then the next week we do a live Q&A session. So we did that just last night. We had a live Q&A session where I go live and answer everybody's questions. We had about 10 or 15 questions from the people in our group that I answered. And then the last week of the month, we'll kind of rotate through different things. Like last month, we had an expert come in and talk to us about some different topics. Sometimes we'll do a garden tour. Sometimes we do a recipe. Sometimes we do food preservation. Like this month, we're going to be talking about canning tomatoes. And so we kind of rotate through different topics on that last week. So every week, you get something new that helps you to become a better gardener. And then you're part of this great community, and we've got about 30 members in it. We just started it about 6 months ago. This is the first time we've opened it up again, and so we're hoping to gain more people in this group. And I just think that you would really love to be part of the Gardening Academy. I am having a blast running it. It's just been a ton of fun, and so I would encourage you guys, in the description of this video, there is a link that will take you to the Gardening Academy page. And you can learn more about it. There's some more videos there, gives you more details, the price and everything like that. There's 2 options. You can either do a monthly option or you can pay for an annual option. The annual option saves you about $50 a year by doing that. So really good options. Go ahead down there and click on those and click on those links and check out the Gardening Academy, because I really, really would love to have you guys be part of the Gardening Academy. It's a lot of fun. We're just digging it. It's just good stuff, and just a blast. And we've covered a lot of really good topics. Coming up, we're going to be talking about, next month, we'll talk about square foot gardening. The following month, we're going to talk about, May, we're going to talk about weed and pest control. And then in June, we're going to talk about how to grow in the heat. July, we're going to talk about season extension and how to grow into the fall. So we've got just a ton of fun stuff coming up. And so great time to join the Gardening Academy. It's only open until next Tuesday, which is the 24th. So it's open until March 24th, and then it won't be open again probably until May. So if you'd like to sign up, please click the link and go check it out. Okay. All right, guys, that's all I have for you. Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. Let me just look and see if we have anything else. Thanks, guys. This is fun. I've never done this before, and it was good to have people here. We had, at the peak, I saw 35 people here, which is cool, and lots of questions and interactions. So a lot of fun, guys. So thank you very much for being here. And I had a blast. Thanks again. And then check back tomorrow. I'm going to do another one tomorrow and then another one on Monday. While we're in this Gardening Academy launch cycle, we're going to do some more. So tomorrow we're going to talk about my key to early gardening success. So that's what we're going to cover. Okay. All right. That's all I have for you guys today. Thank you very much again for being here. Everybody have a great day. Happy gardening.